Okay, the binding of Isaac, the Akedah. That's what in tradition we just call it the binding. You know which binding we're talking about. This is a story which it's right up there. It's one of the classic stories of the Torah, like Garden of Eden, maybe the Exodus, but this is like the binding of Isaac is, and it's captured the imagination not just of our people, but of all of, I don't know, what we might call Western civilization, and you can see that in the artwork. There's a whole class that ought to be done here, just in the artwork of the binding of Isaac. Here's some examples. Here's Rembrandt's take. Rembrandt, who interestingly was a great painter of the Jews, and actually and of the Jewish story. Here's Caravaggio, which I find like particularly haunting, right? That sort of black and white. But anyway, there's a lot that has been represented, said, written. Certainly entire college courses have been devoted to just the theology of this story, because it's hard to come up with a theology for this story. It's hard to pin it down. It's a little like the book of Job in that way. It's like it's there to bother us. That much is clear, because at the very least we can say that this is a story which celebrates the willingness of someone to sacrifice their child, and at the same time is there to say, this God does not want you to sacrifice your child to it. Those things are both happening in the story, so it's not like those are colliding thoughts, and we end up in the middle, just freaked out and disturbed, and we're supposed to be. I didn't prepare much for this class. I don't know that I can prepare. How can we be prepared to enter into this story? I think what happens is that we start to head into it, and there's just like a buzz that starts, and like it starts right away, and it gets louder and louder, and it's like being in some sort of panic attack. And there's no, it would be phony to say that we could figure this out, understand it. Either to condemn it or to celebrate it, I think would be phony. Though, you know, I'll take pushback on that point. But our purpose today, at least if we have one purpose today, is to understand why it is one of the hallmark stories of Rosh Hashanah. It's picked as the Torah reading on the second day. And it is like, it's a classic reference point. A lot of the other PUT poems across the liturgy will refer back to the binding of Isaac. So let's just start by asking the question, why? Why is it here on Rosh Hashanah? There I think are some classic answers, and one of them is at least hinted at by the legend that the shofar is meant to remind us of the ayal, of the ram that was sacrificed in place of Isaac at the end. But okay, so that's just a hint. Anyone have a sense of, oh, there's the Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah, the binding of Isaac. Why is that so? I don't want to venture not a guess or a theory, but just sort of what is your understanding of that? Noah.
My thought is that in this section of the Parsha, it's also talking about Abraham breaking away from all the other ancient Near Eastern religions that may or may not have had child sacrifice as part of their rituals. And in this, it's showing that our God does not require that, and that though he was participating, he he I think deep in his heart he didn't want to sacrifice his son, but that's what God demanded, so he followed.
Okay, well, before we get too deep into the narrative, let's stop there. But Noah's giving us a very cogent theory of what this story is doing here on Rosh Hashanah, which is to say, yeah, life and, if I can add a little bit, life and death is on the line here. And there are gods that will demand life. But our God does not, in the end. Our God is distinguished from those gods. And so today too, we might find redemption, salvation. We might not be sacrificed. That's one theory. David.
Well, to answer your question, I think it's a centerpiece because the whole story starts out with God put Abraham to the test. So here we are, Ovino Volcano. So if we're going to be asking for everything we ask for at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, certainly to sit in judgment, the first thing we have to do is believe in this God. So that's what it feels like to me.
Okay. We're on trial. Abraham was on trial, right? Anyone else? One more? Let's see. I think Ruth. I think Ruth Joni.
Hi. Just all the years I heard the story, I was so upset. And then I heard about Sarah. And when she hears about this and her death. And I just want to put that into the narrative about Abraham and angels and Isaac. And it's so much of a man's story that I never felt part of. And Sarah's heartbreak after everything she's been through. And I don't know where that goes, but that's so enormous for me that's in the background, but for me, it's also in the foreground.
You couldn't have put it better, Joni. I'll tell you where it goes. It goes on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. The first day's reading of Rosh Hashanah begins by Hashem Pakadet Sarah, and God remembered, attended to, rewarded, redeemed Sarah, and after all those years, she was able to conceive, right? And presumably that's there because God will attend to us and will attend to our prayers, our greatest prayers, right? Even if they seem impossible. And that's in the foreground of Rosh Hashanah and of the story. The story itself, right, is a taking back of what seems to be God's great deliverance. And I think you're right that Sarah in some ways is like the representation of that. And the Midrash says, yes, and she heard the news, and the very next parsha is Chaye Sarah, is about Sarah's death. She couldn't take it, her heart was stopped. Okay, I know there's a lot to say here, but I want to head into the text at least to have material to chew on, and we're just going to wander. I mean, one of the magnificent things about this story, which is so well written, if nothing else, is that there's a slow journey happening in the story, a walk, and you feel yourself moving deeper and deeper into the story. And as the horror builds, you're further in, right? So you're yeah. I will say, maybe the most classic answer to why this is here on Rosh Hashanah is because Isaac was willing to sacrifice himself. That's a spin on the story, that Isaac becomes a representation of, look, self-sacrifice. I'll give myself up to God. It's a little bit funny because Isaac seems to have no volition here, but Isaac is willing to sacrifice himself. Look at what our forefather Isaac did in that merit. Take Isaac's willingness as a kind of a substitute for our sacrifice today. that's a funny rendering, and especially funny because it really does feel like it's a story not about Isaac, but about Abraham. And it's Abraham's consciousness that I always feel like I'm trying to get into. Okay, so let's head in. I want to give us, I said this is just going to be like a kind of a noise in our heads, a kind of an alarm, a kind of building hum of terror. But lest we be unable to focus at all, let me give us 3 kind of focal points, okay? Just to keep in mind. I haven't got a theory, but here are 3 focal points to keep in mind. There are 2 lies that Abraham tells. There are 2 names of God that Abraham uses. And there are 3 moments, this is especially from a literary perspective, especially prominent. There are 3 moments where Abraham says, Hineni, here I am. 3 times in this very short story. Okay, so let's just like keep those marker posts in mind as we head into the story. Okay, we'll read a paragraph and then I see hands up. We'll come and we'll analyze together. So let's take a look here. I'm going to put it in the chat. I think this is the right one. Oh no, that's a YouTube link. Hold on, let me go get it. YouTube link to the Twin Peaks soundtrack there. I'll leave it to you to figure out what the connection is between Twin Peaks and The Binding of Isaac, but there is one. Okay, here we go. Safaria. All right, in we go into the madness. All right. Okay, Vayhi achar advarim ha'ele. And it was after these things. What are these things? I don't know, all of the things of Abraham's life, but I must say, one of the things that we must keep in mind is that not long ago, Abraham was arguing with God that God not destroy wicked cities. I always feel like that's the thing. God, like the thing before is that Abraham's willing to argue with God, but now after these things, and I'm going to use the names as we pronounce them, Elohim and Adonai, just because it's important to keep track of the names. The name Elohim, which is right here, is the first name of God given in the Torah, and it means gods or forces, as if our God is all the gods. It doesn't mean gods plural because it has a singular verb usage. Right, so one name for God, and it's usually we translate it just as God. In modern Hebrew, it's that way, Elohim. So one of our names for God is the gods, all the forces. Okay, so Elohim. Him tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he answered, Hineni, here I am. Okay, there it is. That's the first one. All right, let's read to the end of the paragraph and we'll think about that a little bit. And God said, sorry. You know, the truth is, I left the gender in one place pointedly, and I wanted, so let's just we're just gonna leave the gender in, even though I don't usually do that, because I want us to get a sense of how the grammar works here, and also because there actually might be something to the gendering aspects of God here. As Joni said, it's a very male story. And he said, take your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and bring him up as an offering on one of the mountains that I will point out to you. Right? That sentence has a rhythm. All right? Take your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac. So the next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey and took with him 2 of his young men and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place which Elohim had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his servants, you stay here with the ass. I think donkey's always a little bit less distracting, isn't it? You stay here with the donkey. the boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the fire and the knife, and the two walked off together. Okay, Abraham just lied. What did Abraham say? There was a lie. Wendy?
His only son, or that's God?
Oh, well, that might be God.
Yeah, I think that's God. Sorry.
That's God. Abraham lied.
About the sacrifice.
About what?
We'll come right back to that.
Yeah.
There it is. Okay, just let's take a look at this line here. Abraham says, you stay here with the donkey, and the boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you. What do you make of that?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I don't think he lied.
Why not?
I think he knew that they were both going to come back.
Okay, good. Thank you.
But I wanted to add something. Well, it's my turn. I wanted to add that when I was studying Hebrew, I had a Yemenite teacher at UC Santa Cruz, and we went through this in Hebrew and he translated, and he said that when Isaac says to Abraham, we have the fire and we have the wood, where is the olah? Abraham says to him, God will provide my son. And that's when Isaac knew that he was the olah. And Shneim alu yachdav. And that's when, I think this is primarily the test of Isaac.
Okay,
and Isaac was a 37-year-old man. He says to him, so where's the olah, Dad? And he says, you're it.
Hold on, though. We're not there yet, Yael.
Okay. Sorry.
Just hold you off because we know this story is imprinted in our cultural consciousness. It's hard not to speak it all the way out, but I just want to move slowly. And I want to take the very important first point that you made, which is this idea that maybe Abraham believed he was coming back with his son. That reading is a way of, I think, justifying Abraham's behavior, isn't it? Abraham didn't really think that he was going to kill his son. Somehow he believed this would all work out, and Yael starts to speak. We can keep that in mind as we move forward, because Abraham's going to lie again, and maybe this will take account of that. The Noam Elimelech, for example, says there's no way that Abraham thought that God would. Abraham just knew that it would all work out. That's a Hasidic thinker. But even much, much earlier, Rashi says, and this is, I'm not going to bring commentaries the whole time, but this is an important one. Rashi says right here, this is, and Yael was referencing this sort of interpretation, that when God says, take your son and bring him up as an offering on one of the mountains, Rashi says, it doesn't say slaughter him. It says just bring him up as an offering. In other words, God wants to see, according to this line of interpretation, which I think I already saw someone rolling their eyes at, even though I only have the 4 people bandwidth here on my Zoom, I still saw one of those people was like, oh, give me a break. But okay, give me a break. But this is one way of trying to make sense of the story, which, remember, there is I'm sort of speaking to the eye roller, but though I get it. I mean, God doesn't actually take the child. So that's another part of the narrative that we're trying to work out here, right? So that's one possibility for thinking about all of this, is that somehow Abraham's tuned into like, oh no, this is a ceremony. This is I'm gonna go and do, right? But come on, there are some eye rollers out there, right? Like this, what is going on with him? What do you think Abraham is thinking? Okay, all right, out to you, Lila.
I guess I'm thinking is hope allowed? You know, I think, to me, this is a kind of expression of extreme, desperate, radical hope. like it's intolerable to think of the alternative of what would happen, you know, when Abraham descends. And like, I think, you know, we don't normally get like conversations between like I don't think it's that typical, like conversations about like everything that's going to happen between someone and their servants. You know, they just do it. The servants are kind of there in the background. So to go through it in this level of detail, I think it's like, it's just, it has, like Abraham has to articulate something hopeful here. And maybe that's a lie, or maybe that's just, you know, the only tolerable thing. And I think like that hineni, you know, that kind of like presence in what is so unknown and intolerable can connect somehow to Rosh Hashanah, but I'll leave that piece for.
Okay. I know, I so appreciate what Lila's done, because this is, what Lila's given us is a very human portrait for a moment, a certain kind of framing of Abraham, which is that he was probably trying to believe in something that he couldn't really, like, that is to say, as we read the story and we are conflicted and torn and horrified, why would Abraham not have been a swirl of chaotic emotions himself? And it could be that what Abraham is doing is not a lie or the truth, but just in some ways, the simplest reading is the one that Lila gives us, which is like, well, I'm sure we'll come back. Like, I don't even know how do we, you know, like you could just imagine this guy somehow feeling compelled to obey this God, and at the same time, this can't be right, trying to work that out, okay? Let's hear from Kathy and then Pam, and then we'll move forward a little bit.
Yeah, I just wanted to present another kind of framing of Abraham that kind of goes along the same lines, but takes it a little further. And actually it was something I heard, a study session I did with Rabbi Ed Feinstein like 30 years ago. And I just remember it so vividly, because what he sort of, to kind of compress it, suggested was that Abraham, we always think of it as, you know, Abraham being tested, but to look at it as Abraham testing God, to say, are you really this kind of God who's going to make me do this? Mm-hmm. And so that it's that kind of framing. And so that it actually kind of, you know, fits, because God says, okay, you take him as an offer, take Isaac as an offering from the very beginning. And so, but it kind of goes farther than that, and saying that in a sense, it's a real test of God, not a kind of bluffing, because he's saying, listen, if you make me do this, it's all over. You know, the whole line is supposed to come through Isaac, right?
Right.
And so if he kills Isaac, then it's over. And he's just going, you know. Great.
This is an interesting reframing, right? It's like calling out God's bluff. You gonna do it? But the fact that you mentioned there is a critical one. That God's promised Abraham that Abraham's gonna have. It doesn't actually make sense, and a lot of the commentators are struggling with, from a narrative perspective, God couldn't have meant it, because then God said the line was going to go through Isaac. Well, but that's so. Well, now God's taking it back, or something doesn't make sense here.
Right, but it's more than calling his bluff. It's almost saying, listen, if you're that God, I don't want this to continue. I don't want this to happen. You may be, I don't know that he necessarily thinks of him as an evil God, but as a force for ill. And so I'm going to cut it off now. So it's almost like, well, anyway,
yeah. Actually, I just want to, that's really interesting. I just want to know how different it is from the framework that Lila gave us, right? Like, that is, Lila's description of Abraham was someone who was, I'm sort of imagining shaky, vulnerable, uncertain, hoping for the best. And yours is a bold Abraham who's like aware of the stakes here and pushing it and saying, who are you, God?
Yeah.
Who are you? Okay. Pam Dorman?
Yes,
Hi.
thanks. One other thought is if Abraham is going to the place, to the mount, to give an offering, and he thinks of his son as an offering, it's kind of like Hannah offering Samuel.
Yeah, that's true. That is a good way to connect the first day's Haftarah reading from the prophets to the second day's Torah reading. Yeah, and all of which, takes us back to the, in some ways, most theologically classic rendering of this, which is, look at what Abraham was willing to do. Abraham was willing to sacrifice the thing that he loved most. So should you be. I mean, that's the disturbing, but theologically, that's one of the strongest voices in the tradition and one of the strongest reads of the, I hate the last paragraph of this. I love this story, and I hate the last paragraph because the last paragraph goes in that direction, but we'll get to that eventually. All right, speaking of paragraphs, let's take a little bit more of a look at this story, just make sure we actually read it in the time. I mean, every line here could be chewed on forever and has been, but let's keep going. Okay. Then Isaac said to his father Abraham, Vayomer Avi, and he said, Father. And he answered him, Hineni b'ni, here I am, my son. There's the second Hineni, right? And he said, here are the fire and the wood, but where's the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, and here I kept the grammar because I just want you to hear how this is an important line. I want you to hear how it just works in the Hebrew with its singular and the gendering of all the nouns here. Elohim will see to himself the sheep for the offering, my son. It's a funny formulation. Elohim yirelo, right here. Elohim yirelo. God, Elohim, will see to himself the sheep for the offering, my son. Okay. Now that we got that, we can change it, change it back. Let's God self. But just to feel that, what? Okay, so there's the second Hineni. Let's maybe start there. Okay, let's maybe start there. How is it that there's something going on here? This Hineni, institutions are called the Hineni Center, and the Hineni Award, like we used to give at Hillel for the person who really showed up. Hineni's become this classic phrasing. We kind of love Hineni. What does it mean? What does it mean? Here I am. But here I am in the most I am present. Here I am fully here. Hineni. Right? So what is going on with Abraham? I guess I'll just ask that again. And note, Abraham's told his second lie here, right? Oh, don't worry about it. God's gonna find a lamb. You know what I mean? What's going on here? And so Abraham was fully present for God. And then Isaac says, my father, and he's fully present to his son. But then he lies to his son. Is he fully present? What? Okay, so let's hear. Rachel.
So I think many of us, I struggle with this story a lot. And sometimes when I try to place it in historical context and how human sacrifice was more common, and if you wanted a religion to institute a big change, simply saying we won't do it anymore is it's not a great dramatic telling of it. But it's not as sort of a specialist story. It's more am I just trying to sleep at night? But going back to I think what Joni was saying at the beginning, the contrast to how Sarah reacts is almost under no circumstance could this have been okay. So I sort of really like the way Kathy was then bringing that in of okay, I'm gonna see if this is what you're really asking of me. And it just I keep thinking of this line from the Netflix series Unorthodox. I don't think it was in the book, though I read the book many years ago, where they ask her why she left, and she says, God asked too much of me. And that just stuck with me, and this, like, it's a beautiful phrasing, but then there's just, this is really like, it's the most almost demanding we ever see God, and it's at the most demanding time of year, and there's just this like innate questioning of myself, or question I can ask myself of like, is there some time when that this is too demanding? And I'm not saying I have the answer, or that even like I can rationalize my way out of it, but it just keeps kind of coming into my mind when I think of this, and in terms of like our own duty as Jews and humans and people, and where the joy and the obedience, like where's that space that I don't know how to finish that sentence articulately, so I'll just stop.
Yeah, like what some have asked the question this way: what was the test? Right? Was the test that Abraham like would be willing to do this, or was the test that Abraham somewhere along the line was supposed to realize that this was wrong? Was the test that Abraham was supposed to like reckon with, oh, I guess all my training in the world I come from tells me that when the gods ask for your child, you just give. But, you know, like till the very end, Abraham's like, does Abraham fail the test? And, you know, the question of Sarah, you know, takes us, as Joni took us, to the questions of motherhood and fatherhood. And not to be, you know, in our community, you know, we're cautious, I think, of gender essentials. But could a mother have done this is one way to, you know, like, there's something like, again, very male, at least of a Bronze Age, about the, I must serve God at all. What is Abraham supposed to be learning here? All right, let's hear from some other folks. Alexander.
I've struggled with this a lot, and I prayed about it a while ago, and like found an answer that was satisfying to me. I'm sure you can poke holes in it, but it was satisfying to me. I looked at it sort of through the different players' like points of view, try to see it from their eyes. And what I got from Abraham was that he was in on it this whole time. It was an agreement between him and God that God was using Abraham to teach Yitzchak humility. Yitzchak needed to grow up. God called him his only son, which he's not, but that's the way he was treated. He was the miracle baby. He's going to lead a whole nation, but he's been coddled and has no humility. God speaks to his father. And so it was a big lesson for Yitzchak. And it was also a big lesson for the people at the bottom of the hill, that it must have, I'm imagining, blown their minds that this was not a God who demanded the human sacrifice, that this was the plan. I think Abraham may not have expected his son to run away or to not speak to him again. But I also think that Abraham was in on this with God and agreeing to act as a teacher to the people around him, teach them about God, to teach Yitzchak how to become his own leader, his own, how to develop his own relationship with God, individuate from his parents, etc.
Okay, great. You're making the question even stronger here, because I think it's clear that the story is polemicizing in the way that you suggest. The story ultimately wants us to reject child sacrifice. That's one of the messages. This God does not want that, does not require that. You don't have to, but the question is, and by the way, that may be, but it doesn't necessarily excuse God from the dare, from the challenge. But be that as it may, the question we're asking, that Alexandra's asking, that Rachel was asking is Abraham in on it? Is Abraham like part of this polemic, or is Abraham a confused and broken and terrified man struggling in the midst of this story, which like larger forces want to carry out in order to tell us like, don't worry, yay, Isaac lives at the end, right? All right, I'll take one more comment and then want to read not the last paragraph because I hate that one, but the next paragraph. Isra.
Yeah, so apologies because I had to come a little later, but I'm thrown into this, for some reason I thought back on one of your studies a few weeks ago when you brought us the Elie Wiesel letter about the Shoah, and it's just that notion of what kind of God are we dealing with here, you know? And then I came to this thought now here that what if, you know, God changes how God acts over time in relationship to? So, because is it after this occurrence that Abraham ends up kind of debating with God about?
Before this.
Oh, it was beforehand? So it's, oh, thank you. So, because I'm like, wait a minute, if Abraham has argued before on behalf of, was it Sodom and Gomorrah? It's like, so you're arguing on behalf of those folks, but not for your son. Yeah, so also angsting with many folks on this, but existential angst kind of. But is this like God unaware of God's power? It's like when you have power, you know, and powerlessness is a part of trauma. I can't help but think about this through the trauma lens. Maybe y'all have already addressed that, but what kind of relationship is this? So it's definitely makes me go back to the line of thinking of, you know, when people turn to God during the Shoah, and it's like, but you've done miracles before. And Elie Wiesel gives us this really beautiful way of like, no, God is suffering too. So now I'm just wondering, is God suffering as God puts God's self through this test with Abraham? Like, what's going on there? I don't have answers, but definitely wondering.
Yeah, okay, and as you speak your thoughts out about this story, I start to think, which we should do, about what it's doing here in Rosh Hashanah, right? Like, if the story asks us to wonder what kind of God is this, if we read it, like almost inherently, the story is asking us to wonder, what is the nature of this God? Does God really want this from us? Could God really ask such a thing? And we're reading that story in the day with like, oh, the books of death and life, who will live and who will die and who will, you know, the story must be there on some level, because those questions about what God is this? Who are we confronting on this day? That's part of what we are thinking or being asked to think on Rosh Hashanah as well. Does God want us to die? Does God want us to sacrifice ourselves, our children, everything we love? Or no, that couldn't possibly be. Unresolved. Unresolved. Okay, speaking of which God is this, let's now, so far, we've been dealing with Elohim. Okay, let's now take a look at the introduction of another God name. Okay, here we go. They arrived at the place of which Elohim had told him. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And then this line here, verse 10, very terrifying line. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. Then an angel of Adonai called to him from the heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And he answered, Hineni, here I am. And he said, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear Elohim, since you have not withheld your son, your only one, from me. When Abraham looked up, his eye fell on a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham, this is important, this is why I kept the grammar earlier, and Abraham named that site Adonai Yireh. Adonai Yireh, as they still say today, on the Mount of Adonai there is vision. Remember, that was the exact phrasing we had above with Elohim yireh lo, right? Elohim will see to himself a lamb. Here, Abraham names the place Adonai yireh. Adonai will see. Okay, I want to just to give a little, because I'm throwing out these God names, but you noticed, right? You noticed all of a sudden there's Elohim, and all of a sudden the angel of Adonai comes. But the angel of Adonai speaks to Elohim about Elohim. But then God thanks Adonai. Now I want to say two things here. One, that our biblical critic friends are certainly tracking these names all the time because they see them as derivatives of two different traditions. But the traditional expression of that is to think of Elohim as the name of din, of judgment, of severity, of gvura, and Adonai is the name of chesed, of kindness, of rachamim, right? So that's you. So here you have the historical or the mystical language to play with. But what's going on here? What's this switch of gods? What happened? Anybody? Okay, people have had their hands up from before, so I'm gonna call on people. I'm not gonna expect them to answer this. But now you have this exchange and interplay of God names here. Okay, Wendy.
Hi, I find this very disturbing and very difficult, and yet when I find that happening, often I want to step back and look. And we talked in the very beginning about the fact that for why this is chosen for Rosh Hashanah, and we begin on the first day talking about Sarah. And I think Sarah actually plays a hugely important part in this. As if you go further, after this happens, after the binding of Isaac, after that, Sarah never speaks to Abraham again. She has totally ended that relationship. She is so devastated, in fact, that they say that she cried herself to death. And I remember a teaching about shofar, that, people talk about the sound of the shofar, what it symbolizes, what it represents. And people, there's a teaching that it's supposed to be, it's a wail, it's a cry, and it's supposed to hearken us to the wail that Sarah cried out when she heard about what Abraham had tried to do to her son, to their son, Isaac. And one of the things that I wonder why the rabbi said to do this there is that here we are at Rosh Hashanah, we're looking at our behaviors, we're looking at what we've done, what we've said over the past year. And this is something where Abraham is doing something and he's not thinking about anything beyond whatever relationship he has with God, but that everything that he does not only is his relationship to God, what he does affects God, it affects everyone else. And that is also part of God. What we do affects others, and what he does, even in this act that he doesn't complete, has killed the relationship that he had with Sarah, and ultimately that agony kills her. So I feel like that maybe that everything that we're thinking about, and even in the shot level, everything has greater depth of effect than we realize, maybe.
Yeah, thank you for that mapping. And let me just add another thread or two to it, which is, you say that Abraham never speaks to Sarah again. That's true. And actually Sarah dies right away. There's some idea that the Rashi says that she just heard the news and her heart stopped, right? Abraham also never speaks to God again. Abraham also never speaks to Isaac again. Okay? So like something happened here that, as Wendy is saying, it shattered all the relationships. Like all of a sudden, you know, whatever we're supposed to learn from it, or whoever failed or succeeded, or whoever would have done, like, everything stops. All communication stops after. It's like they've seen something and they can't look at each other anymore, right? That's one way of looking at the Torah's kind of skeletal conversations, like the one between Abraham and Isaac. It's such a brief exchange, and then that's it. And that's it. They never talk again. And many have noted that this is worth throwing in. I think someone was referencing it earlier. That in the end, okay, so this is the last paragraph, which I just wish wasn't here because the whole thing is so paradoxical and dizzying and terrifying, but complex. And then the last paragraph is, and the angel of Adonai called to Abraham a second time from heaven and says, by myself I swear, Adonai declares, because you have done this and not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the heaven and the sands of the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants because you have obeyed my command. Well, it's hard to interpret your way out of that. But look at this. Abraham then returned to his servants. Do you remember that Abraham said, we will return to you? And that wasn't going to be true? But it turned out to be true. Right? It turned out Isaac survived, and yet it doesn't say Isaac came back. V'yashav Avram. Is it just a way of speaking? Or as the Midrash suggests, does Isaac go somewhere else after this? Does Isaac take off and say, I can't be with my father anymore? Survived, but didn't survive the relationship. Right? Okay. Let's see here. Okay, we still have time. Jamie, I think it's Jamie out there with a hand.
Oh, I put my hand down because
okay, that's fine too. Let's see. I'm trying to just catch David. I think we're circling back to people who have spoken before, so I'm just trying to keep an order, but I never get exactly right. David, are you?
I have to bring. I wish this was an original thought here, but I have to bring in a reading that I did a few years ago from Rabbi Sachs. It's called "The God Who Acts in History," and he writes these amazing things about how the Hebrews were the first to discover the meaning of history as an epiphany of God. And I'm assuming that that Adonai and Hashem can be interchangeable. He writes, this is the meaning of Hashem, the God who intervenes in history. As Judah Levi points out, the 10 Commandments begin not with the words, I am the Lord your God who created heaven and earth, but I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt from the house of slavery. His main point is Elohim is God as we encounter him in nature and creation, but Hashem is God as revealed in history.
Great.
I
so appreciate that. Great. Let's flesh that out a little bit, because there is something happening here, and David and Rabbi Sachs is giving us such full language for it, which is that the word Elohim, as I said, means the gods or the forces of the world, and they're all one for us. So the forces of the world that act upon you, the severe picture of God, maybe because the forces of the world are severe. The word Adonai, we say Adonai, which means my master, right? But that's just a substitute, as is Hashem. The word Adonai, if it were meant anything literally, it's a name, but it means the one that was, is, and will ever be. Okay? It is a mashing of the verb form to be, right? Haya, hoveh, yihyeh. Okay? So think now of the God that intervenes in history language that David was just giving us. The forces of the world, or the gods, ask of Abraham an impossible, immoral, terrifying thing. The God of history intervenes. The God who is with us throughout time comes in. The God who will save us from Egypt, right? The God who helps. And Abraham starts off saying, I guess Elohim's going to do what Elohim's going to do. But then the angel of Adonai comes down and says, wait, I can help you. And yet somehow the angel of Adonai says, it's good that you fear Elohim. Important to fear Elohim, but now I get it. It starts to get like back and forth. Like for our biblical critic friends, you would at least concede, I think, that the author of this story intends those names to be swirling back and forth and in dialogue with one another, right? So whether they come from two traditions or are authored by the same tradition, there's still some sort of, we're supposed to be going back and forth and thinking, well, Adonai is our savior, but Elohim is the one that tests us. Somebody in the chat wrote different aspects of the divine. And maybe that's also what we're contending with here. We are confronting a God on Rosh Hashanah who is terrifying and asks the impossible, and we are remote from. And yet we are also hoping that some aspect of that same God will come and help and save and care for us. That God who has always been with us throughout time. Okay. Hannah.
So I'm just wondering today, I feel it's so crazy how things hit you differently in different moments, but what do we think is a cost that's acceptable? So you lose your relationship with God, you lose your relationship with your wife, you lose your relationship with your kid, but because you did what God asked you, all of us profit from that. So we exist because you sacrificed your family for us, and we glorify that, and we see that as okay. What if it was you and your wife and your kid and your relationship with God? Would it feel as acceptable for you to sacrifice that for the sake of many, many, many generations from now being able to exist? How do we calculate those costs? And also, are we even the ones calculating it? Because in the moment, Abraham's just doing what he thinks he's being asked. And he's not thinking about, what does this mean for 10 generations from now? He's thinking, or it seems he's thinking, this is what I have to do. And what are the things that we feel this is what I have to do, that we don't see the fallout that's coming from them, either the good or the bad, that we don't have the gift of that foresight. And so we're just in the minutia of where we are. We can't see the forest through the trees. We're just bumbling along, trying to take the next right action, trying to do the right thing. And maybe it is for someone somehow in the world in 10 generations the right thing, but it doesn't feel like the right thing. And how do we grapple with that, and how do we reconcile that? And I don't have any answers. I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Yeah, very powerfully put. Those are good questions to ask on Rosh Hashanah, aren't they? And I have to say also, I leave your thought as it stands. I don't need to nuance that any further. I have to say that what you're describing reminds me, and I think probably it is worth mentioning, the meaning of this story to Christians. Very, very important story to Christians as well, and it is in part because Isaac is like a proto-Jesus, right? Going to sacrifice on behalf of all of us, right? That idea, Isaac did it willingly, right? But there's a parallel there, and it must mean that this is an important notion in religious consciousness, that someone else made the great sacrifice for us. We would never do that. We would never want to do that. We don't have to go up on a cross. We don't have to be bound on the altar, but someone else did, right? Someone in our mythic past did. What does that mean? Do we valorize that, or do we valorize the fact that we don't have to, or that we shouldn't? Very, very, very confusing questions. Oh, Jamie's got his hand back up.
Hello.
Hello. When you're dark, I don't see the hand as quickly.
Hi. I still haven't figured out what I have to say, but I feel like I'll just
might as well say something, right?
You'll probably make sense of it. So when you talked about the parallel to Job, or I don't know if you talked about you mentioned that, but I'm thinking about that a lot today, and I'd never considered that the two stories are so similar that it's like the greatest man of the generation, the purest good Jew alive, and God essentially makes a deal with the devil and says, yeah, go and mess with this guy's life and go, and maybe in this story, Elohim is, if I may, to be so bold, like the Satan character of Job, who's just there to. That's
pretty bold.
Yeah, sorry. Do this kind of like irrational testing of a tzaddik. And then I'm also thinking about how like there's a tradition that tzaddikim, the best of the generation, are the ones that are the most tested for however that works theologically. And I think just with both stories, I really resonate with the Job story because I just think there is a fundamental amorality at the heart of existence. Like the Elohim, the forces of the world are amoral, and like you can't extract a merciful God from what we see around us. And yeah, maybe Abraham was like tricked. Maybe he received some sort of false prophecy that this is what he was supposed to do, and he followed it. And then Adonai, intervenes and says, maybe to him, no, this is wrong. Like you've heard the wrong message, and that's maybe where the switch comes. And I believe that there is that force, there is that fundamental force of good. Despite the amorality of existence, it is within us all the time, and it just like emerges maybe in these darkest moments, and it's circulating through everything. And so that's my ramble.
Yeah, no, that was a good ramble. That was an intense ramble. I mean, look, putting God on trial here, but maybe that's what we're meant to do. And they say, like I said, very, very bold. Very bold to say that Elohim is sort of the Satan figure here. But there's a version of that boldness that is in the Torah itself, right? And we're drawing to a close here. There's one other text that I feel like we must always read in tandem with the Akedah. For me, this is like, there are so many commentaries, you could fill libraries of this, but there's one verse in the Torah that I think it's critical to read after we've read the Akedah with all of its paradox and complexity and horror, and that is this one. It's from the book of Leviticus. Do not allow any of your offspring to be offered up to Molech, and do not profane the name of your God. I am Adonai. Okay? So child sacrifice is forbidden. Don't do it. It's wrong. I mean, that's pretty stark. Now, this god Molech, they say was a Canaanite deity, Moloch, right? Speaking of Satan, right? The Satanists, the Aleister Crowley crowd, they're into Moloch, right? The Dark Lord. But who's Molech? Who is Molech? Look at that word.
The king.
The king. I mean, it's the same, like, there's some kind of wordplay here, whether it's a separate god that they're referencing, or separate tradition of the god, or whether the Torah is making this up and saying, no, Molech, the king force, the ruling god, the ultimate, absolute master, the one we worship on Rosh Hashanah. The king, HaMelech, right? Don't offer your children up to that god. Be careful about that God, all right? We don't do that anymore, all right? We don't do that anymore. So there's something here, even as our Rosh Hashanah liturgy is sort of all about submission to the awesome power of God. And in some ways, by bringing this story, seems to ask us, like, you too be willing to submit, to give up everything. What will you give up to God? Would you be willing? You should be willing, right? And yet, there's something in this story and in the Torah's message itself that says, like, no. The God we worship is Adonai. And Adonai saves from that. Adonai doesn't want that. I'm Adonai. Don't worship Molech. Right? You can't say, the Torah can't say, don't worship Elohim. But one wonders. All right, I think we're out of time today. I hope that you can never prepare for this story, but it's worth preparing. It's worth sort of, this I hope will shape our entry into Rosh Hashanah. which is Yom Din, the day of judgment, the day of coronation, the day of the king, the day of all these like heavy, male, severe, weighty, punishment-oriented, and yet like we will read a story that takes all of that, dives into it, turns it on its head, rips it apart, and leaves us spinning. And I think that's maybe part of where we're supposed to be as we head into Rosh Hashanah. Wish everybody a good new year. May you be sealed as Isaac was ultimately in the book of life.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
I will say this is the last class that I'm going to give in Elul, and I think I should say on Ikar's behalf that these classes are only able to happen because people donate money, and it's great if you can, and you do so in part so that we can maintain them for free, which is what's really important, that we should all just have access to learning Torah together. So that's the most of a pitch I'm ever gonna give, but hooray for Ikar and hooray for its supporters. Okay, I wish you well, and
thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Marco.
What?
Tell us about the Twin Peaks.
Yes.
Oh, what's the connection?
Yeah, what's
You have to give, I'm not going to do that. You have to give away the ending of Twin Peaks. But if you see the ending of Twin Peaks, you know that there's a parallel. There's a parallel. Like if you figured, actually, it's not even the ending. They tell you, the weird thing about Twin Peaks is they tell you towards the end of the first season, and then there's another season. But the mystery, who killed Laura Palmer? Who killed Laura Palmer, Anyway, answer that question and you will know what the connection is. Okay.
Abraham killed Laura Palmer.
Abraham killed Laura Palmer, exactly.
I totally
right. Exactly right. Abe in the woods. All right, peace everybody.
Shana Tova. Bye-bye. Thank you.
So much. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.